My brother told everyone at the funeral that I had always been the difficult one. The one who left. The one who never really cared about the family the way he did. The one who chose a career over people, a city over roots, ambition over loyalty. He said it while standing in a house he had just signed over to himself. He did not know I had already made a phone call.
Now,
Let me back up. My name is Renata Voss. I am 41 years old. I am a structural engineer based out of Columbus, Ohio, and I have spent the last 16 years of my life calculating how much weight a thing can hold before it fails. Bridges, parking structures, foundations, load-bearing walls. I do this for a living because my grandmother, Dora Voss, sat me down at her kitchen table when I was 9 years old with a set of wooden blocks and showed me that the difference between something that stands and something that falls is almost always invisible. You cannot see a weak joint from the outside. You have to know where to look. Dora Voss was a woman who knew where to look at everything. She was 79 years old when she died on a Tuesday in early March in the house on Caldwell Road in Morgantown, West Virginia, where she had lived for 51 years. The house had a covered porch with a swing that needed a new chain every few years, a kitchen that always smelled like black coffee and something baking, and a spare bedroom with pale yellow walls where I slept every summer from age 6 to age 15. I drove down from Columbus the morning after my Uncle Philip called. 6 hours and 40 minutes on 70, east through flat gray Ohio farmland into the hills. I had my travel mug, a bag of sunflower seeds, and the specific hollowness that comes with losing the one person in your family who always told you the truth. I should tell you about my brother Derek before I tell you what I found when I arrived. Derek Voss is 44 years old, 3 years older than me. He lives 20 minutes from Morgantown in a house that has needed a new roof since 2019. He manages a sporting goods store and has managed it for 11 years, which he describes as running his own operation because he forgets that someone else owns the building. Derek is not a cruel man in the way that requires planning. He is cruel in the way that comes from never once being told no by the people who loved him most. Our grandmother was the exception. She loved him clearly, and she also saw him clearly, which is the rarest combination in a family like ours. Our parents split when I was 7 and Derek was 10. Our mother moved to Roanoke with a man named Gary who sold wholesale flooring. Our father stayed in Morgantown for 4 more years and then disappeared into a string of addresses that nobody kept current. What that left was Grandma Dora's kitchen table on Sundays, her voice on the phone when things got hard, and her spare bedroom with the yellow walls when the rest of the world felt like it had run out of room for us. I left for Ohio State at 18. Derek stayed. And for the 23 years since, my brother has made sure that every family member within 100 miles understood that leaving was the same as abandoning, that building a life somewhere else was the same as not caring, and that the fact that Grandma Dora and I spoke on the phone every Sunday for 16 years somehow counted for less than his proximity.
proximity.
That was his currency. And he had been spending it for a long time. What I did not know when I pulled onto Caldwell Road that Wednesday morning, with frost still on the grass and my grandmother 3 days gone, was that Derek had spent the last 11 years spending something else entirely. What I need to tell you about next took me 3 days in Morgantown to begin to piece together. The house on Caldwell Road looked the same from the outside. White clapboard siding, green shutters, the covered porch with a swing that Grandma Dora had finally gotten a new chain for last spring. She had mentioned it on the phone. Said she'd had a young man from the hardware store come out and hang it because the old one had rusted through. I remember thinking I should have driven down to do it myself. Derek's truck was already in the driveway when I arrived. A black Silverado with a cracked taillight that had been cracked since Thanksgiving 2 years ago. He came out onto the porch before I had even opened my car door, which told me he had been watching from the window. "You made good time," he said. Not, "I'm glad you're here." Not, "It's good to see you." Not even, "It's been a hard few days." Just, "You made good time." Like I had completed a delivery. I said I had left early. He nodded and went back inside. Uncle Philip was in the kitchen with a pot of coffee and the particular expression of a man who has been managing 2 difficult things at once and is very tired. Philip is my grandmother's youngest brother, 71 years old. a retired science teacher from Fairmont with bifocals and the kind of patient voice that makes you trust him immediately. He hugged me for a long time without saying anything, which was exactly right. The funeral arrangements were already half made. Derek had handled them, which surprised me until Philip caught my eye over Derek's shoulder and gave me the smallest shake of his head.
Not now.
Later. I let it go. There are moments when you understand that information is being held for the right time, and grief is not always the right time. I spent that first day doing the things you do. Sitting with Philip, answering calls from relatives, making sure the food people kept dropping off had somewhere to go. I walked through the house slowly, the way you walk through a place you love when you know it is changing. The boxwood folding ruler was still on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. It had been there my whole life. 12 inches, dark wood, worn smooth along the spine, with 2 sets of initials carved near the brass hinge. Evie and D.V. Ernest Voss and Dora Voss. My grandfather, who died before I was born, had carved them there the year they moved into the house. Grandma Dora had told me that story so many times I could hear it in her voice without trying. She used to say he measured everything twice and loved everything once, and that was why both things lasted. I picked it up, set it back down. That evening, after Philip had gone to his motel and Derek had driven home to his house 20 minutes away, I sat alone in the yellow spare bedroom and noticed something I could not immediately name. The room felt lighter than it should have. Not emotionally, physically. The bookshelf along the east wall had gaps in it. Not dramatic gaps. The kind you only notice if you knew what used to be there. 3 leather-bound volumes of my grandfather's surveying logs that Grandma Dora had kept on the second shelf since before I could read. A ceramic lamp with a blue base that had lived on the nightstand for as long as I could remember.
Gone.
I told myself she had probably moved things.
People rearrange.
Rooms change. But I opened the closet, and the top shelf, where she used to keep a cedar box with letters and photographs, was empty. Not rearranged. Empty. The cedar box itself was gone. I stood there for a moment in the closet doorway. Then I went to the kitchen and checked the drawer beside the refrigerator where Grandma Dora kept important documents. Phone bills, insurance cards, the warranty for her water heater. It was all still there. That drawer hadn't been touched. But the small fireproof lockbox she kept on the top shelf of her bedroom closet, the one she called her important papers box, the one I had seen her open exactly twice in my life, once for my grandfather's death certificate and once for a property tax document, that was also gone. I did not say anything to Derek the next morning. Some things need to sit while you figure out what shape they are. But I started paying attention the way my grandmother taught me. Not loudly. Not with accusation. Just with my eyes open and my mouth closed, the way you assess a structure before you decide where the problem is. The first sign had been Derek's face on the porch. The second sign was the empty shelves. The third sign came at the funeral home. We were sitting across from the director, a soft-spoken man named Gerald Pruitt, going over the arrangements Derek had already made. Casket, flowers, the small reception room for after. It was fine. It was appropriate. And then Gerald Pruitt slid a folder across the table and said, in the gentlest possible voice, that the prepayment arrangement had already been settled by the estate account. I looked at Derek. She had a pre-need plan, he said, not looking at me. Set it up years ago. I said I didn't know about that. He shrugged. There's a lot you didn't know about. You weren't here. Gerald Pruitt looked at his folder. I looked at my hands, and I thought about the lockbox, the cedar box, the gaps on the bookshelf. You know that feeling when something is wrong but you cannot yet say exactly what, so you just carry it quietly, because naming it too early might make it disappear before you can catch it? I carried it out of that funeral home and into the cold March air and said nothing. What happened in the 3 days between the funeral home and the reading of the will is the part one almost didn't include in the story, because it was the part that almost worked. The funeral was on a Friday. Small, appropriate, and exactly what Grandma Dora would have wanted. No excess. Lilies on the casket because she had grown them in her side yard every summer. The pastor from First Methodist on Spruce Street who had known her for 30 years. 41 people in the pews, which for a woman of 79 in a town she had lived in her whole life felt like a full room. Derek gave the eulogy. And I want to be honest with you about this, because honesty is the only thing worth offering in a story like this one. It was good, not performed, not hollow. He stood at that podium in his dark suit with his hands gripping both sides of the lectern, and he talked about the Sunday dinners. The way she made biscuits from scratch every Christmas morning. The time she drove 40 minutes in a snowstorm to bring him soup when he had the flu the winter he was 26 and had no one else. He talked about sitting on that porch swing with her on summer evenings and how she never needed the conversation to be about anything important to make him feel like the most important person in the room. His voice broke twice. Both times felt real. I sat in the third pew with Philip on one side and my cousin Annette on the other, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not expected. Not forgiveness. Not exactly. But something adjacent to it. A reminder that Derek and I had loved the same woman. That whatever was wrong between us, we had both lost something true. After the service, he found me by the coat rack and said, "She always said you were the smartest one." I looked at him. "I used to be jealous of that," he said. "I want you to know I'm not anymore." I did not know what to do with that sentence, so I said thank you, and he nodded and walked away. That night, at the reception in Grandma Dora's living room with her friends and neighbors moving gently through the house, Derek brought me a cup of coffee without being asked. He remembered how I take it. 1 sugar, no cream. He sat beside me on the piano bench for 20 minutes, and we talked about the summers we spent in this house as kids. The creek behind the Hendersons' property, where we used to catch crawdads. The summer he broke his wrist falling out of the oak tree in the backyard and Grandma Dora drove him to urgent care without once raising her voice. It was the best conversation we had shared in maybe 15 years. I went to bed that night thinking that maybe grief does something to people. Opens them up. Reminds them what they actually are underneath the years of resentment and competition. I thought, maybe this is the beginning of something different between us. I want you to remember that I thought that. Because 3 days later, I sat in the office of a probate attorney named Carol Whitfield on the 4th floor of a building on High Street in Morgantown, and I found out exactly how long Derek had been planning the thing I had not yet let myself name. Carol Whitfield was a compact woman in her early 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the specific patience of someone who has delivered difficult information to families for a very long time. She had represented my grandmother for 9 years. She knew her well enough to call her Dora rather than Mrs. Voss, which told me something about the nature of their relationship. There were 4 of us in the room. Me, Derek, Uncle Philip, and Annette, who was there as the representative of the Georgia branch of the family. Carol Whitfield set a folder on the desk and said she wanted to begin with a disclosure. The word disclosure landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. She said that my grandmother had executed a will in 2019 that she, Carol, had drafted and witnessed. In that will, the house on Caldwell Road and its contents were to be divided equally between Derek and me. The surveying logs, the personal effects, and a savings account of approximately $44,000 were to go to me specifically, as Grandma Dora had noted that I was the one who had expressed interest in the family history. Past tense. Had executed. Carol Whitfield then said that in November of last year, a second document had been filed with the county recorder's office. A quitclaim deed transferring the property at Caldwell Road entirely into Derek's name. She said she had not drafted this document. She said she had not been consulted about it. She said she had, in fact, only learned of its existence 10 days ago when she pulled the property records in preparation for this meeting. The room was very quiet. Derek was looking at the window. I was looking at Derek. Philip had taken his bifocals off and was holding them in both hands. Carol Whitfield said, in the same measured voice she had used for everything else, that she had some questions about the circumstances under which the document had been signed, given that my grandmother's physician had documented a diagnosis of moderate cognitive decline beginning in the spring of last year. Derek said, still looking at the window, that Grandma Dora had known exactly what she was doing. Carol Whitfield said she did not doubt that he believed that. There is a difference between being patient and being a placeholder. I did not know that yet. Not fully. But I was beginning to understand that the conversation on the piano bench, the coffee with 1 sugar and no cream, the broken voice at the podium, had not been the beginning of something different between us. It had been the last hand played in a game I hadn't known we were playing. What I found out next took me 3 weeks and one very important phone call to fully understand. I did not fall apart in Carol Whitfield's office. I want to be clear about that, not because falling apart would have been wrong, but because I think you need to understand what kind of person my grandmother raised. Dora Voss did not raise women who collapsed in attorneys' offices. She raised women who listened, absorbed, and then went home and figured out where the load was actually being carried. I thanked Carol Whitfield. I asked her 2 questions. The first was whether she still had a copy of the 2019 will.
She did.
The second was whether the quitclaim deed could be challenged if the signatory lacked legal capacity at the time of signing. She paused for exactly 1 second before she said that was a question worth exploring with the right documentation. I wrote both answers in the small notebook I carry in my coat pocket for site measurements. Then I picked up my bag, said goodbye to Philip and Annette, and walked past Derek without speaking. He called my name once in the parking lot. I kept walking. I drove back to Columbus the next morning, and I gave myself exactly 48 hours to be sad before I started working. The sadness was real, and I am not going to skip over it. I sat in my apartment on the 3rd floor of a building on Bryden Road with a mug of chamomile tea, and I cried for my grandmother in a way I had not let myself do since Philip called. Not for the house. Not for the money. For her. For the woman who had put a folding ruler on a kitchen windowsill and told a 9-year-old girl that the difference between something that stands and something that falls is almost always invisible. I thought about the last time I had seen her in person. 14 months before she died. I had driven down for her 78th birthday, and we had sat on the porch swing for 2 hours in the October afternoon while the leaves came down from the oak tree in the backyard. She had been slower that day than I remembered, choosing words more carefully, pausing mid-sentence in a way she never used to. I had noticed it and told myself it was just age. I should have looked closer. That was my profession. I knew how to look closer. After the 48 hours, I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was call a woman named Dr. Patricia Osei, a neurologist at Ohio State Wexner Medical Center who had consulted on a project I worked on 2 years ago involving accessibility renovations at the hospital. She was not my grandmother's doctor. She was simply someone I trusted to explain what moderate cognitive decline actually means in legal terms. She was patient and precise. She told me that moderate cognitive decline typically affects executive function, judgment, the ability to understand complex documents, the ability to resist pressure from authority figures or people in positions of trust. She told me that a person in that stage can appear lucid in conversation while being genuinely unable to comprehend what they are signing. She told me to get the medical records. I wrote that down too. The second thing I did was call Philip. He picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the television in the background, a nature documentary, something about birds. He turned it down without me asking. I told him what I needed. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I was wondering when you were going to make this call." He told me things he had been holding since before the funeral. He told me that in the summer before last, Derek had begun driving Grandma Dora to her appointments. Not because she asked him to, because he had quietly told her that her driving had become unsafe, which was partially true, and positioned himself as the only reliable option, which was not. He told me that Derek had introduced her to a notary named Russell Gaines who worked out of a strip mall office on Greenbag Road in Morgantown. Philip had met Russell Gaines once at Thanksgiving and described him as a man who had very smooth hands and did not look people in the eye. He told me that the cedar box from the spare bedroom closet had gone missing around October. And then he told me the thing that rearranged the architecture of everything I thought I understood. He said that 2 weeks before she died, Grandma Dora had called him at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. She had sounded confused, and then suddenly very clear, the way people sometimes do. She had said, "Philip, I think I did something I didn't mean to do. I can't remember the paper, but I remember the pen." He had not known what she meant.
He knew now.
I sat with the phone against my ear for a long time after he finished. Outside my window, a bus went down Bryden Road. Someone on the sidewalk was walking a dog that stopped every few feet to investigate something invisible. I said, "Philip, do you still have the voicemails from her phone?" He said he had transferred them to his computer the week after she passed.
He didn't know why.
Just felt like something worth keeping. I said, "Don't delete anything." This is the part of the story where I need to show you what I found, because it matters that you see it the way I saw it. 3 days after my call with Philip, a manila envelope arrived at my apartment. Philip had driven to a copy shop in Fairmont and scanned everything he had. Medical records from Grandma Dora's primary care physician, Dr. Anita Shenoy, documenting the cognitive decline diagnosis dated April of last year. A copy of the notary log from Russell Gaines's office, which Philip had obtained by simply walking in and asking for a copy of any notarizations involving Dora Voss, citing his status as a family member of the deceased. Russell Gaines, it turned out, had not anticipated anyone asking. The notarization of the quitclaim deed was dated November 14th. Dr. Shenoy's notes from October 30th described my grandmother as demonstrating significant difficulty with complex decision-making and showing signs of increased susceptibility to suggestion. 15 days apart, I pulled the envelope out and laid everything on my kitchen table under the overhead light. Bank transfer records Philip had found in a separate folder in Grandma Dora's filing cabinet, the one Derek had apparently not thought to check, showed 3 withdrawals from her savings account in the 8 months before her death. Each one was for exactly $9,000. Each one had been made at a branch in Morgantown on a day when Derek had driven her to her appointments. $27,000. Gone in increments small enough that no single transaction would trigger a bank review. I sat down at my kitchen table. I did not cry. I took out my notebook and I wrote down every number, every date, every name. Then, I did what my grandmother taught me to do when I was 9 years old at her kitchen table with a set of wooden blocks. I figured out where the load was actually being carried. And then I figured out how to move it. What I built over the next 2 weeks was not a case made of anger. It was a case made of paper. I have spent 16 years as a structural engineer producing documentation that has to be precise enough to keep buildings from falling on people. I understand that the difference between a claim and a fact is evidence, and the difference between evidence and proof is organization. I did not need to be told how to do this. I needed to be told where to submit it. Carol Whitfield became my first call on a Monday morning, 8 days after I had driven back to Columbus. I told her what Philip had found. I told her about the medical records, the notary log, the 3 withdrawals at $9,000 each. I told her about Russell Gaines and his smooth hands and his strip mall office on Greenbag Road. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Renata, I need you to send me everything you just described, in order with dates." I said, "I already have it organized." Another pause. "Shorter this time." She said, "Good. Come see me Thursday." I drove back to Morgantown on a Wednesday evening and stayed at Philip's house, a 2-story colonial on Maplewood Avenue with a bird feeder outside the kitchen window that his late wife had put up in 2009 and that he had kept filled every winter since. He made chicken and rice, and we sat at his kitchen table until almost midnight going through everything a second time. He had found one more thing since our phone call. In the back of Grandma Dora's recipe box, a green metal tin she had kept on the second shelf of the pantry since before I was born, behind a card for her cornbread and a clipping for a chess pie she had never actually made, there was an envelope, cream-colored, sealed, with my name written on the front in her handwriting. Philip slid it across the table. I recognized the handwriting immediately. She had always written my name the same way. They are slightly larger than the rest, a small loop at the tail of the A. I held it for a moment without opening it. Philip got up and refilled his coffee and looked out the window at the bird feeder in the dark. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. The handwriting was hers, but slower than I was used to. More deliberate. The way you write when you are choosing every word carefully because you understand that words on paper last longer than words in the air. It said, "Renata, if you are reading this, it means I ran out of time to say it in person. I want you to know that I have not changed my mind about the house. I wanted to go to both of you the way I always said. I signed something this fall that I did not fully understand, and I am not sure I can undo it. Derek means well, but he is afraid of being left with nothing and afraid people make mistakes. The ruler on the windowsill is yours. It always was. Your grandfather would have wanted you to have it. You know where to look. I love you. Keep measuring twice.
Dora.
I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. Philip was still looking at the bird feeder. I said, "She knew." He said, "She knew." Carol Whitfield's office on Thursday morning smelled like coffee and old carpet and the particular stillness of a place where serious things get resolved quietly. She had a paralegal named James who took notes without being asked, and a way of reading documents that made you feel like the truth had finally found a room with good lighting. I laid everything on her desk in order. Medical records from Dr. Shenoy. Notary log from Russell Gaines. Bank withdrawal records. Philip's account of the late-night phone call. The quitclaim deed. The 2019 will. And the letter. Carol Whitfield read the letter last. She set it down. She took her glasses off the beaded chain and held them in her right hand. She said, "This letter alone will not overturn a recorded deed. But combined with the medical records and the timing of the notarization, we have a credible basis to challenge the deed on the grounds of undue influence and lack of capacity." She said the bank withdrawals were a separate matter and suggested I contact the West Virginia State Police Elder Financial Exploitation Unit. She said the notary, Russell Gaines, had a professional obligation to verify that the signatory understood what she was signing, and that if he had failed to do so, his notarization could be challenged. She said the process would take time, probably 6 to 8 months, possibly longer if Derek chose to contest. I said I understood. She looked at me over her desk, the way people look at you when they want to assess whether you actually mean what you say. I said, "Carol, I am a structural engineer. I have submitted permit applications to city planning departments in 4 states. I know how to wait for a process." She almost smiled. "Then let's begin," she said. "I want to tell you about the 2 weeks after that meeting because they were the strangest weeks of the whole story." Derek called me twice. I did not answer. He texted once, a message that said, "Renata, I think we should talk before this goes any further. Family stuff should stay in the family." I read it in the parking lot of a Panera in Columbus while eating a sandwich I had not tasted. Family stuff. I thought about my grandmother driving to urgent care in a snowstorm. I thought about Sunday phone calls for 16 years. I thought about a woman in her 70s sitting at her kitchen table writing a letter slowly because she was afraid she had signed something she didn't mean to sign and was running out of time to explain it. I thought about 3 withdrawals of $9,000 each. I did not respond to Derek's text. Instead, I went home and I photographed every document in the manila envelope and uploaded them to a secure folder. I emailed copies to Carol Whitfield and to Philip. I printed 1 full set and put it in a new accordion file I labeled with the date and my grandmother's address. Then I took the boxwood folding ruler from my coat pocket, where I had been carrying it since the morning I left Morgantown, and I set it on my desk next to the accordion file. EV and DV carved near the brass hinge. Ernest and Dora. I was not doing this for the house.
I want you to understand that.
I was doing it because my grandmother had sat at a kitchen table with a letter and a slow hand and tried to tell the truth before she ran out of time. The least I could do was make sure someone heard her. What happened next did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It happened the way most true things happen. Slowly, then all at once. Carol Whitfield filed the challenge to the quitclaim deed in Monongalia County Circuit Court on a Thursday morning in late April. The filing cited 3 grounds. Lack of testamentary capacity, based on Dr. Shenoy's medical records. Undue influence, based on Derek's documented pattern of isolating my grandmother from independent counsel and positioning himself as her sole transportation and point of contact. And notarial misconduct, based on Russell Gaines's failure to verify that my grandmother understood the nature of the document she was signing. The West Virginia State Police Elder Financial Exploitation Unit opened a separate inquiry into the 3 bank withdrawals the following week. A detective named Rosa Ferreira called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing load calculations for a parking structure in Dublin. She had a direct, unhurried voice and asked good questions. I sent her the bank records that same evening. I did not tell Derek any of this. Not because I was hiding it. He would find out through his own attorney, when the filing was served. I simply had nothing to say to him that the documents did not already say more precisely. He called 4 times in the 2 weeks after service. I answered once on a Sunday evening because I had decided I would give him one conversation and then I would be done. He said the deed had been her idea. He said she had wanted him to have the house because he was the one who had been there. He said I had chosen to leave and leaving had consequences, and he didn't see why he should apologize for understanding that before I did. I let him finish. Then I said, Derek, Dr. Shenoy documented significant impairment in her capacity to make complex decisions 15 days before that deed was signed. The notary logged the appointment. The bank recorded the withdrawals. I have a letter in her handwriting saying she did not understand what she signed. Silence. I am not calling you a monster, I said. I am telling you what the record shows. He said I was going to destroy the family over a piece of property. I said, you did something to a 78-year-old woman with cognitive decline who trusted you to drive her to her appointments. I am asking a court to look at that. Those are not the same thing. He hung up. I set the phone down on my kitchen counter. I stood there for a while. The hearing was set for a Thursday in late July, for months after Carol Whitfield filed. Monongalia County Circuit Court, 2nd floor, courtroom C, Judge Miriam Haas presiding. I drove down the night before and stayed again at Philip's house. He made soup this time, vegetable beef, and we ate at the kitchen table without talking much. The bird feeder outside the window had a cardinal on it, bright red against a gray July evening, and Philip watched it for a long time between spoonfuls. He said, she would have liked knowing you did this. I said, she's the one who did it. She wrote the letter. She made the phone call to you. She left the records in the filing cabinet where Derek wouldn't think to look. She knew where to put things. Philip nodded slowly. She always knew where to put things, he said. I want to tell you what the courtroom looked like, because the details matter. It was a small room, wood paneling, fluorescent lights, 2 long tables facing the judge's bench. Carol Whitfield sat to my left with her folder open and her glasses on. Derek sat at the other table with an attorney named Brian Paulson who had a good suit and an uncertain energy. The kind that comes from knowing your case is built on sand. Derek did not look at me when I came in. Judge Miriam Haas was a tall woman in her late 50s with gray-streaked hair pulled back and the composed expression of someone who has heard a great many people explain themselves. She read the filings without visible reaction. She asked Carol Whitfield 3 questions. She asked Brian Paulson 2. Then she asked Derek's attorney whether his client disputed the medical records. Brian Paulson said his client believed the decedent had been of sound mind. Judge Haas said, Mr. Paulson, the decedent's physician documented moderate cognitive decline in April of last year. The deed in question was signed in November. Is there a medical opinion to the contrary in your filing? There was not. She asked whether the notary, Russell Gaines, had any documentation showing he had explained the deed to the signatory in plain language or offered her independent counsel. There was not. She read my grandmother's letter aloud into the record. The room was very quiet while she read it. When she finished, she set it down and looked at both tables for a moment. Then she vacated the quitclaim deed. She ordered the property to revert to the estate and to be distributed according to the 2019 will. She referred the matter of the bank withdrawals to the ongoing state police inquiry. She noted for the record that the notarization conducted by Russell Gaines showed significant procedural deficiencies and referred his conduct to the West Virginia Secretary of State's office for review. She said all of this in the same measured, unhurried voice she had used for everything else. Brian Paulson was already writing something on his legal pad. Derek sat very still. Carol Whitfield closed her folder. I looked at my hands on the table. The notebook I always carry was in my coat pocket. I had not needed it today. Everything that needed to be said had already been written down by someone else. By a woman with a slow hand and a cream-colored envelope and a recipe box on the second shelf of a pantry on Caldwell Road. I thought. She measured twice. Outside the courthouse, on the wide stone steps in the July heat, Philip put his arm around my shoulders and didn't say anything for a while. Annette had driven up from Charleston and was standing 2 steps below us with her sunglasses on, looking out at the street. Derek came out a few minutes later with Brian Paulson. He stopped when he saw us. He looked at me for a long moment. I did not look away. I did not say anything. There was nothing left that needed saying out loud. He walked to his truck. The one with the cracked taillight that had been cracked since Thanksgiving 2 years ago. He sat in it for a long time before he started the engine. I watched him drive away. Then I reached into my coat pocket and took out the boxwood folding ruler. Turned it over once in my hand. The brass hinge caught the light. EV and DV. I put it back in my pocket. Philip said, "Soup tonight?" I said yes. What happened in the months after that Thursday in courtroom C was quieter than I expected, and more complete. The house on Caldwell Road went through probate over the following 4 months. Carol Whitfield managed the process with the same unhurried precision she had brought to everything else. By November, the estate had been distributed according to the 2019 will. Derek received his half share of the property value. I received mine, along with the savings account, the surveying logs, and the personal effects Grandma Dora had designated for me. The cedar box was returned. Derek had kept it in a closet in his house. His attorney advised him to return it once the deed was vacated and the state police inquiry was active. It arrived at Philip's house in a cardboard shipping box with no note inside. I opened it at Philip's kitchen table on a gray November afternoon with the bird feeder empty outside because Philip had forgotten to refill it and we both noticed at the same time, and he went out in his coat to do it while I sat with the cedar box open in front of me. Inside were the photographs I remembered. My grandfather in a surveyor's field somewhere in Preston County in 1971, squinting into the sun with a level in his hand. My grandmother at 26 in a yellow dress outside a church I didn't recognize. My parents at their wedding, young and uncertain in the way people look before life has finished introducing itself. A report card from my second grade year at Chestnut Street Elementary with a note in the margin in my grandmother's handwriting. She sees everything. Keep watching. I sat with that for a long time. The state police inquiry resulted in a formal finding against Derek in February of the following year. The Elder Financial Exploitation Unit determined that the 3 withdrawals totaling $27,000 constituted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult under West Virginia law. Derek entered into a restitution agreement rather than face criminal prosecution. The $27,000 was repaid to the estate over 18 months. Russell Gaines, the notary from the strip mall office on Greenbag Road, had his commission suspended for 12 months by the West Virginia Secretary of State's office for failure to follow proper procedures in notarizing a document signed by a person with documented cognitive impairment. I did not feel triumphant about either of those outcomes. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something closer to tired and correct. The way you feel when a structure you flagged as compromised finally gets the repair it needed. Not excitement. Just the quiet resolution of something that should not have been left wrong. Derek and I did not speak for 7 months after the hearing. In February, he called on a Sunday evening. I almost didn't answer, for the same reason I almost don't answer unexpected calls anymore. But I did. He did not apologize immediately. I respected that more than I would have respected a rehearsed apology. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I told myself it was fair. That I had earned it by staying." I said that so many times, I think I actually believed it for a while. I said, "I know." He said, "I don't know if she forgave me. I think about that." I said, "She put your name in the 2019 will, Derek. She wanted you to have your half. She just didn't want you to take mine." He was quiet again. Then he said, "She always knew the difference between those two things." I said, "She did." We talked for 22 minutes. It was not a reconciliation. It was not a restoration of what we had been, because what we had been was built on an imbalance that had been growing since before either of us was old enough to understand it. But it was something. The first conversation in a long time that didn't have a transaction hidden underneath it. I don't know what we are to each other now. I think we are two people who loved the same woman and made very different choices in response to losing her. Maybe that is enough to build something small and careful from. Maybe it isn't. I am not in a hurry to find out. The house on Caldwell Road sold in March. I had considered keeping my half and buying Derek out, but the truth was that the house was not something I could maintain from Columbus, and more than that, I understood that what I needed from it I had already taken with me. The surveying logs are on the bookshelf in my apartment on Brighton Road. The cedar box is on my desk. The ceramic lamp with the blue base is on my nightstand, and I turn it on every morning. The boxwood folding ruler is on my windowsill above the kitchen sink. I put it there the week I got back from Morgantown, and I have not moved it since. Every morning when I fill the kettle I see it. The dark wood worn smooth along the spine. The brass hinge with the two sets of initials. Evie and Davy. Ernest and Dora. I think about what she told me when I was 9. That the difference between something that stands and something that falls is almost always invisible. You cannot see a weak joint from the outside. You have to know where to look. She was talking about buildings then. She was also talking about everything else. Here is what I know now that I did not know when I pulled onto Caldwell Road in early March with frost on the grass and my grandmother 3 days gone. I know that proximity is not the same as presence. Being in the room does not mean you are paying attention to the person in it. I know that love is not measured in miles. My grandmother and I spoke every Sunday for 16 years. She knew my projects, my frustrations, my measurements, my fears. She knew I took my coffee black and that I kept a notebook in my coat pocket and that I still thought about the crawdads in the creek behind the Hendersons' property sometimes when I needed to remember what simple felt like. Distance did not erase that. It just meant we had to be deliberate about it. And deliberate love, I have come to believe, is more durable than love that simply occupies the same zip code. I know that a woman with moderate cognitive decline and a slow hand and a cream-colored envelope and a recipe box on the second pantry shelf still found a way to tell the truth. She measured twice even at the end. She put the right things in the right places for the right person to find. I try to be worthy of that. And I know this. The most dangerous thing a family can do is confuse sacrifice with love and proximity with loyalty and silence with peace. I was quiet for a long time because I thought quietness was the same as keeping things together. It isn't. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for the people who come after you is to refuse to let a lie be the last word. My grandmother understood that. She wrote it down in a slow hand on a cream-colored piece of paper and put it in a recipe box behind a cornbread card and trusted that I would know where to look. She was right. Have you ever found something that someone left behind for you to find? A letter? A document, an object, something that told you they had been thinking of you even when you weren't in the room? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. A structural engineer from Columbus drove back to her hometown after her grandmother died and found out her brother had transferred the house into his name while their grandmother was losing her capacity to understand what she was signing. She didn't raise her voice once. She just organized the paper trail her grandmother had quietly left behind and let the truth speak in a courtroom on a Thursday in July.